It's actually the third time I've been in Germany in the last 2 months, so I'm not going to make sure that I include some novel information specifically targeted at this audience. I also want to invite you to ask questions during the presentation. I'm very happy to field questions at any point. If you want either clarifying detail or you want to press on any of the concepts or ask indeed about your own industries. We'll try to manage the time in order to make that happen. So I want to give you a couple of different messages. The first is that we're simply going to cover about 30 years of industrial history and show you things that have taken place over time and why I believe that things are so profoundly different in the platform economy relative to the traditional product economy. I also want to argue that platforms beat products in any context where the two coexist. As we move from the industrial economy to the internet economy, there are some pretty profound shifts in things that are taking place. Matter of fact, it's kind of fun to describe this as an analog to digital transformation. Many of you might recognize this as the Hokusai wave, digitized for the future, and things actually are quite different in the new economy. So more specifically, I'm going to argue that we are seeing the rise of gigantic monopolies today, and that in fact they're inevitable in the internet economy. But it is for the opposite reason that we found the gigantic monopoly firms of the industrial economy a century ago. We'll see if we can be more precise about that than what that means in terms of management overall. Then we want to see why it is that platforms beat products in any market where the two compete. They always win. If it's the case that there is going to be a platform in that market, there will be a platform in that market. So you are better off being there first if you can. It's also worth noticing how things have changed in industry. These are the 7 largest companies in oil and banking. Oil is 1.5 trillion in market capitalization. If you go to banking, it ups it a little bit to 1.7 trillion in market capitalization. But if you look at the platform economy, the top 7 firms are 4.8, almost 3 times in market capitalization. It's remarkable how much things have begun to change relative to what had been the leading sectors of the economy. What about how industry is organized? 40 years ago, 2 generations, the principal assets of organizations were tangible assets, physical good. Here it was 83% of market cap of firms was tangible, 17% intangible. Today, that's completely flipped. It's inverted. Now, it's 84% is intangible. That's in information or software or in business model. And only 16% or less is actually in the tangible assets of the firm. So things are changing quite dramatically as, again, we move into the internet economy. Few things say it more than this particular slide. What's interesting, and this is even numbers current as of yesterday, if you've been following the market cap of Uber versus BMW, for example, they're now about the same size and value. But Uber does it with almost 1/10 of the employees. Likewise, Airbnb is about the same market value as Marriott, but again, in this case, it's less than 1/10 of the employees. A particularly interesting one is Walt Disney. They create some of the most famous culture and content out in the world today. Our kids may watch the movies. But what's fascinating, Facebook, you and I create the content on Facebook, and yet Facebook is worth more than twice Walt Disney. It's amazing, actually, how things are changing. To really emphasize that point, if you take the ratio, market cap to employee, there it is, and it ranges from 5 to almost 20 times in the platform economy. It's really quite extraordinary how much additional value is being created in the platform economy rather than doing it via the employees. It's a fundamentally, and again, I'm going to argue it's a structural change in business model. Be clear about what's happening there. The product business model is broken. Any of you still have a BlackBerry? No one willing to admit it. Okay. Well, what's interesting is that BlackBerry was absolutely the dominant product for years. Matter of fact, they had half the market, 49%. In 4 short years, they went from 49% to 2%. That's hard to do, right? You don't necessarily want to be the managers leading that particular charge. And in fact, what's interesting is, have they managed to come back? Interestingly, if you add Microsoft combined, their market share is 0.25%. You might have expected Microsoft to do a better job, but again, in some of these winner-take-all markets, it's really hard to come from behind in these platform markets. And it's not fair just to pick on BlackBerry. If you look over time, Apple faced exactly the same problem. In the 1980s and 90s, again, I promise you a little bit of history here, Apple almost went bankrupt. It almost disappeared. Its market share had fallen down below 4%. Microsoft had exploded, having 6 times the number of developers and the number of applications in the marketplace. What was the difference? Again, this was products always lose to platforms. Steve Jobs in the 1980s was running a product strategy that was closed. Bill Gates was running an ecosystem strategy which was open. One was charging $10,000 for the toolkits, the other was giving them away. Well, where is the added development going to take place? It's going to be where it's subsidized and easier to build. Other things of that sort are also happening. So how is the column on the left related to the column on the right? Any thoughts? How's the column on the left related to the column on the right? No hands. Well, one of them is a feedback, right? One of them is a feedback in here. Each side attracts more of the other. So more Android developers, more Android users, more Twitter posters, more Twitter followers. More LinkedIn employers, more LinkedIn employees. You get all of these projects on there. The other thing I want to draw your attention to, almost all of these interactions or value creation is taking place outside the firm. So all of this value being for Twitter, Upwork, LinkedIn, Airbnb, Alipay, Xbox, whether it's SAP or Intuit or other B2B examples, the value is being created by external parties. It's really quite interesting. So we'll come back to that. This is network effects value. All of these companies. This is not a bass diffusion model. This is a network effect model where parties are creating value for other parties in there. This is what's giving you this exponential slope. This is what's giving you the exponential takeoff. If you can get this dynamic going, this will be the thing that actually helps your business model succeed against other competing business models. We'll touch on that again when we get to innovation. So why is it's so different? Again, I want to claim this was the internet era, just like the industrial era, but for the opposite reason. So what was the reason firms won? How did we get monopolies in the industrial era? It happened here in Germany. It happened with Siemens and others. It was all supply-side economies of scale. With Siemens electricity and laying some cables between here and India was really fascinating. Also, BMW here in automotive. It was happening in electricity, automotive, iron, oil, railroads. Each of these things are driven by supply-side economies of scale, massive fixed costs, low marginal costs. What's happening in the internet economy is more of this feedback or network effects. Network effects are also called a demand-side economy of scale, and they're leading to incredible market concentration. Microsoft, despite not having a presence really in mobile anymore, still has 90% market share in desktop. Alibaba controls 80% of market share in e-commerce in China. Google, 87% market share of the operating system in mobile. Facebook, 2.6 billion users in the ecosystem. Amazon, 2/3 of book and digital sales online. It's extraordinary. YouTube, 77% of online video watching. WeChat, it's exceptional. It dominates the social economy. If you visit China, beggars take payment in WeChat Pay. It's unbelievable how much penetration they have. Extraordinary. To drive home, again, what's really happening, to give you, a quick demonstration from Economics 101, this is just a demand curve and a supply curve. So again, with high fixed cost, low marginal cost, what happens? You get scale, you crush the competition, lets you lower prices, which then lets you get scale, and the process starts over. So you are dropping your supply curve, which leads to natural monopolization in this industry. Watch what happens in the internet economy with the platform. If it's the case that your community is creating value for other members of the community, users attract users, which creates value, which attracts users, which creates value, which pushes your demand curve up and to the right. It is this sense in which you say it's the opposite reason that we're getting gigantic firms, natural monopolies. This, by the way, we weren't necessarily going to talk about regulation, but the kinds of ways that you're going to intervene in antitrust with demand economies of scale are fundamentally different than the kinds of interventions you need to do in supply-side economies of scale. It's not just creating competition or breakup. That will be an inferior solution, but it's a different business model entirely. The other implication about this, by the way, is that you have to get scale. It's interesting, we don't have a slide on it here, but I can also show you the vast majority of all these platform firms are showing up in Silicon Valley and in China. A small number are showing up here in Europe, and an even smaller number in Africa and in Latin America. One of the things that we argue for these demand economies of scale, it's easier to do this in homophone markets. It's much more straightforward for users to create value for other users in the same language than it is across different languages or if it's very fragmented. And hence, a large English-speaking market or a large Mandarin-speaking market is easier to create network effects. You should and can start niche, and then you should expand as much as possible into other marketplaces. What then happens is you cannot scale network effects inside the firm. There's a profound insight that comes from this. Value-creating activities have to shift from inside to outside. So whether you're talking about operations or strategy or marketing or finance, all of the major functions of the firm have to take on external counterparts. So when I teach in a business school, what's fascinating is that everything that we teach in business school has to move from what we taught traditionally to what we're now taking on as new practices outside the firm. It doesn't matter if you're B2B, B2C, whatever. I'll show you this. Each of these things must be scaled outside. We'll start with marketing because I like to use Coca-Cola. They were the ones that were the most famous marketing company in the world until platforms took over. So according to Coca-Cola, marketing evolved over the decades from single message to segmentation to individual targeting to virality and social influence. We can take the Coca-Cola slide and overlay the new changes in vocabulary, and it's gone from push and outbound messaging, where the firm would create the message, to pull and inbound, where the community creates the message outside the firm. To illustrate that for you, I don't know how many of you wear fashion glasses, but Warby Parker will ship you 5 pairs of glasses and then invite you to wear them and post them to your social media. What's happening? You are then marketing their glasses. It's wonderful. So your friends can tell you what looks good or what looks funny on you, but you have become the marketing instrument. Harvard Business Review article actually points out quite beautifully that the path to profitable growth may lie in a company's ability to get its customers to become, in effect, its marketing department. And look how that scales as you compound it over time with other folks who are actually telling you on the message. You can look at lots of different organizations that have been able to do that. Can you get your firms to do that? Interestingly enough, I think Mercateo was in the audience. They've done a remarkable job of getting customers and buyers and suppliers to both get both sides onto the platform. Clever ways of actually making that happen. Operations and logistics is another one. What we teach in business school is the supply chain. Many of you will have seen Porter's value chain model here with inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing. This is a standard supply chain. It's really easy. As a theorist, you can actually model this as a pipeline. It's very straightforward. How would you do that? You take the incoming parts, you add value, you mix them, you add value, and you create something effectively like that. Whether it's Exxon drilling oil and adding and refining and moving that to market, or whether it's Coca-Cola and taking sugar and water and tons of branding and advertising and moving that, right? It's that same pipeline process. That's not what happens for a platform. For a platform, you take the production and the consumption and you lift them off the platform. You enable third parties to help you out and create on your behalf. So in this case, whether it's Airbnb bringing on rooms or Uber bringing on rides, you take the good ones and you keep them on the platform and you kick the bad ones off. Or if it's apps, you keep the malware, you keep the apps that are bad off the platform and you keep the good ones on. Notice that this will scale arbitrarily. You can scale as fast as you can add partners. You are not even incurring the marginal cost of production. It's a remarkable difference in business model. And it's also a spectrum. At one end is a pure pipeline. Dell, Coca-Cola, ExxonMobil, that's a pure pipeline company. And here is a pure platform company. And you get more value scaled on the other side. Notice also that you get network effects increasing as you move from left to right, as you help the community create value for other members of the community. On the top, we have consumers, and on the bottom, we have B2B examples in each of these different kinds of business model. And again, it's really interesting that you don't have to incur the cost of production. There are more than 40,000 listings for Airbnb in Paris alone, it would be impossible for Hilton or Hyatt or Intercontinental or Marriott to have that. You can't carry the capital costs. Airbnb doesn't have that capital cost. It just doesn't matter. If the room goes empty, there is no problem for them, right? Not incurring the marginal cost or owning the inventory, it just doesn't matter. Matter of fact, there's even, many of you will have heard the old observation now that Facebook doesn't create its own posts, Airbnb doesn't own its own rooms, Uber doesn't own its own cars, Alibaba doesn't manage its own, or doesn't have its own inventory. It's much, much easier to have third parties do that. Finance is an interesting one. Only 5 years ago, there was an incredible debate in the finance community about how much money venture capitalists were putting in to Uber. A famous finance professor at NYU who does textbooks on this was actually arguing that venture capitalists putting $1.7 billion into Uber was ridiculous. He did a discounted cash flow analysis on this, right? He estimated the global market share, asked about the barriers to entry, and asked how much it would be worth. He said, couldn't possibly be worth more than $5.9 billion. This was 5 years ago, by the way. Okay, so when they're getting their Series B funding around. He said, look, if you disagree with me, take my spreadsheet, run your own numbers. One of the guys that disagreed with him, lead investor in Uber, he did take the spreadsheet. And he said, look, one of the things you're forgetting is network effects. If you get a feedback going, riders attract drivers in here, then it really does begin to take off and you get more of this geographic coverage. But it gets better than that. Because now you're not just going after the yellow taxi market. If you get enough coverage, then you can go after Hertz and Avis and the rental car market. And then if you get additional coverage, then you can actually start to go after Ford and BMW and Toyota. You don't have to own a car anymore. You can simply rent it. My kids these days, actually, I'm stunned. My teenage sons don't seem interested in getting driver's licenses. They're using Uber. It's mind-boggling to me. And they're using that as their means of transportation. If you can cover that market, then you can go after FedEx and UPS and delivery services because now you've got logistics on top of this. Notice what's happened. You're not just looking at the yellow taxi market. You have moved the boundaries of industry from taxi to rental to car ownership to logistics. You have gone across 4 separate entire markets. So if you're only focusing on taxis, you're missing the point. There's so many other things that can still be done. And even today, even though they're struggling on that, the market value today, $47 billion, not 5.9. What's interesting is if you took, he had access to the internal numbers. If you took the access to the internal numbers, the taxi market in San Francisco had already tripled. So if you take 5.9 and triple it, you get 17. So ironically, Darren was not that far off, but he wasn't accounting for the market growth as a way to actually get there. It was really quite interesting. Also, you have to manage the external community. These are recent acquisitions of different companies. So Amazon buys Twitch, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Google buys Kaggle, and YouTube and Waze as other external communities. What's fascinating is that you're buying assets and production outside. So you're buying professional networks, photographers, developers, videographers, data scientists outside the organization. It's not tangible assets. Often you appear to overpay initially, just based on the assets alone. One of the most famous examples, of course, was Instagram. They paid $1 billion for 13 employees. I guarantee you could have hired any one of those employees for less than a 13th of a billion. Right? I would have been happy to work for that. Right? But what did they do? They paid $1 billion for 30 million users. That's the number you can do in your head. That's $33 a person, and that's reasonable. Those $33 a person are now up to $45 or $50 a person, so it turns out to have been a bargain. You must value the external assets and the assets of the community, not just those of the company itself. Just to emphasize why it's kind of fun, he goes to the moon and takes 5 photos. They go to the bathroom, take 37. Right? Your community is starting to create that content. You need to intercept it and help add value on your own as a way to get there. Human resources, this one is obvious. Right? It used to be the case that in management we were teaching about hierarchy, which you then go to flatter organizations as information technology would let you manage more. Now, it's cloud labor. In this case, you can actually go out and hire it as you need it out in the marketplace, and you don't necessarily have to own the employee at the individual level. You can buy it on Upwork. You can get legal advice at Rocket Lawyer. You can get expertise on travel from TripAdvisor. Are you going to get expertise from one individual or from 10,000? In crowdsourced environments, you can get the best of the best competing to give you advice. So it's really a very different business model as you're acquiring skills in different locations. Information technology is another interesting example. Here, we've evolved quite a bit over time, again, from inside to outside the firm. We started with enterprise resource planning back office systems. Then, so this was inventory, restocking, process control, workflow management. This then moves to front office, customer resource management systems. So lead tracking, order taking, price quotes, customer support. Now we're doing what I would call social media out of office system. You're having to manage communities outside. This is true whether it's B2B or B2C. You're doing sentiment analysis, content scheduling, media monitoring, SEO optimization, so folks find your content outside. But again, it's using the IT systems to manage resources outside the organization. It's also really powerful to see how this works. So Jeff Bezos, there's a wonderful description. Many of you may have seen the Yegi rant. Someone who worked both for Google and for Amazon. He describes the process that Jeff Bezos uses in running his organization. Here, all teams will expose their data. Everyone has to communicate through the same processes. No backdoors, so there's no cheating. And this element here in point 4 is critical. Everything must be externalizable. This is where, again, we get to value creation outside the firm. If what they did with Amazon Web Services, they first met all of their internal demand, then they opened APIs to let small to medium-sized enterprises build on top, externalizing the resource. It was a brilliant move to take that capacity and then allow others to do it. Here is a set of all of the APIs of the different retailers. Notice anything about Amazon? 1 to 2 orders of magnitude more application programming interfaces than any of the other retailers. What's this do? It allows third parties to attach to and build on top. If you then go to the market capitalization across each of these, Amazon, Walmart, Target, Macy's, Best Buy, this is over a decade. You can only squeeze so much value out of your logistics and your supply chain. Walmart competed with Amazon in logistics. It optimized the supply chain incredibly well. But you could only squeeze so much value out of that supply chain because it asymptotes. It has to. By contrast, if third parties are building, if you have others setting up shop on top, getting new data analytics on top of your organization, this can keep compounding growth. If more people are designing to Amazon Web Services, more companies come in, more programmers come into Amazon Web Services, more small shops set up on top, then it actually grows over time. Now you can go from Walmart, 48% growth, or Best Buy, minus 31% growth, to Amazon growing over 2,000% in a decade. It's incredible, the difference. R&D and innovation is also essentially different, really profoundly different here. It's fun to illustrate it with tangible goods. And Mark Andreessen, who's one of the most successful venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, argues, a platform can be adapted to the needs and niches that the original developers did not anticipate. So what does that mean? You're getting ideas that you don't have from people you don't know. That's a really important innovation capacity. To illustrate with a tangible good, what was one of the first modularly recomposable products? Ford Model T. You could take it apart. Users then made it into other components such as hay carriers, flour mills, race cars, mobile churches, snowmobiles, sawmills, and even goat carriers as other ways of actually adding value to the ecosystem. What you want to think about is whether you've opened your ecosystem. This is the competition between MySpace and Facebook, going back historically. And you know what the big difference? So this is MySpace in red, which was winning, and they should have owned this market, versus Facebook in blue. You know what happened here? This first bump? That's when they went from colleges to industry to .com. That gave them this first bump. What about this convex growth over here? How did that happen? This is roughly when they opened to outside developers, and Zynga brings in Mafia Wars and poker and Farmville. Then folks start spending hours on social gaming and inviting their friends in, which makes attractive developers, which invites more people in and spend more time. That's when it really takes off. But you don't have to take my word for it. Even the founder of MySpace admits that what they did was a mistake. He said, "We tried to create every feature in the world ourselves. We should have picked 5 to 10 key features and let the ecosystem innovate on everything else." What had he done? He'd made the exact same mistake Steve Jobs had made 30 years earlier. He kept it closed rather than inviting third parties in to help out. I was hearing some wonderful stories here. German industry needs to open up a little bit and get more ecosystem partnerships and stop trying to do everything yourself. You need to see if you can actually create industry alliances or invite third parties in to help out. We'll come back to that when we get to some transitions in just a bit. Here's a schematic to show it to you. Imagine this is Microsoft Windows. This is Word, PowerPoint, Excel. This is the long tail diagram where you simply sort all the value of each of the different applications on top. Microsoft, of course, wants to own Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. But Microsoft doesn't need to own all of this. What I want you to do, add up in your head the value from here to here versus the value from here, right, all the way over there. That last little tiny bit of value is a sliver of value. It doesn't look like anything. But the sum, or rather the integral, of all of those different sources of value is enormous. And it dwarfs the value added by the firm itself. That's another reason why these things matter so much. To show it to you in another form, imagine this is the innovation trajectory of your own R&D group. And I don't care what your slope is. What I want to do is I want to invite third parties in so that you change your slope, so you get innovation happening at a higher pace. If that happens, you may start from a lower value proposition. So this is time, this is value. You can start from a lower value proposition, but because your slope is higher, you have to overtake the product leader, whoever it is. It's only a matter of time because you're accumulating value at a faster pace. Now, if you succeed at getting non-linear growth, at getting feedback, then your growth looks like this, and it really takes off, and it's hard to catch up. Again, this is why I say platforms beat products every time. They appreciate in value for network effects, where products depreciate in value, and platforms innovate faster. They accumulate ideas you don't have from people you don't know. That is a really interesting trick. To drive this point home, what is your cost of failure if Flappy Birds as an app fails? Almost nothing. What's your upside if Angry Birds succeeds? You capture 30%. It's unbelievable. What this means is that you've got the option on successes, but you've shed the cost of experimentation and failure. Again, it's a different business model where you get more ideas building the ecosystem. Really different chain. Strategy is fundamentally different. What we teach in business schools is Porter's 5 forces, and it doesn't work in a platform space. To drive that product home, right? At the time that the iPhone came out in 2007, 7 firms controlled all handset profits, and it looked completely unassailable. If you looked at the standard firms, Nokia, Samsung, Sony, Motorola, BlackBerry, they were incredibly famous brands. They looked like they had unbelievable barriers to entry, huge supply chains and logistics. Nokia alone had spent $40 billion in R&D. World-class logistics, you had to sell through a telecommunications provider, so it looked like you had regulatory protection. Yet 6 years later, so instead of 99% to 7, 6 years later, one firm had 92% of all industry profits. Extraordinary. What's interesting, I love to observe, the former CTO of Nokia like says, geez, is it the case that the management of all 7 firms was clueless, or had something else changed? One is running a platform business model, the others are running product business models. Platform business models win. Something else is fundamentally different. If you're running the product business model, you're typically using Porter's 5 forces. You're protecting your barriers to entry. You are keeping competitors out. You are minimizing the advantages of your buyers and suppliers. You're decreasing the competition from substitutes. Your weapon is cost leadership. This way you can justify low prices, or it's product differentiation, so you can justify high prices. And you're inimitable of that resources. Those resources that no one else has are what give you your sustained advantage. It doesn't matter in a platform world. What matters there, instead, is the interactions that take place. How many of your business partners come through you? That is where your network effects happen, those engagement. Then your demand-side economies of scale protect you in the same way that your supply economies of scale would have protected you in a product world. Okay? Another element of this, rather than barriers to entry, you want permissionless entry of production and consumption. Amazon wants as many people to set up stores on Amazon Web Services as possible. Uber wants all of the drivers on Uber, right? Airbnb wants as many people to put their rooms on Airbnb and not on Marriott as another. So you want frictionless production consumption of your in your supply chain, not barriers to entry on that part. Another fascinating element, boundaries move as competitors can become complementers. So they may add value to your platform. Skype is a Microsoft product, but it's allowed in Apple and Google. Kindle is an Amazon product, but it's allowed on Apple and Google. iTunes is an Apple product, but it's allowed on other products. The trick is, does it add value? And can you control the relationship? If you can control the relationship, you can allow your competitors in your ecosystem rather than keeping them strictly out. You may then actually get data in ways that you would never be able to get it otherwise. Imagine you let a competitor in your ecosystem and you still control the relationship. You will get data on their product failures, sales, and success modes. You couldn't buy that data if you knocked on the door and offered to pay for it. And now you're getting it for free. It's a completely different business model as you gain access to that data overall. Here's another illustration. Here are at least a dozen different products on Android and iPhone were wiped out in sales. Not even trying. Garmin GPS, TomTom GPS, Canon and Nikon cameras, Olympus voice recorder, Sony PlayStation Portable, e-readers, Nokia cell phone, BlackBerry, Microsoft MP3 player, Cisco video camera, Jawbone fitness tracker, Fitbit, HP programmable calculators, Timex watches, Filofax day planners. This is a real problem for traditional strategy. How in the heck are you going to build barriers to entry at boundaries you can't define? Filofax day planners and watches and cameras don't look like one another. Those products look like different market boundaries. Okay? It's not obvious who the competitors are. The other element of this is you don't necessarily have to own those resources. Filofax day planners are wiped out by having Evernote on there. HP calculators are wiped out by an app from a third party. Google and Apple didn't even have to build those. You can get a fantastic HP financial calculator from a third party for 99 cents. Apple didn't do it, Android didn't, Google didn't do it, and most importantly, HP didn't do it. But it's crushing HP sales. This is why I say you don't necessarily have to own all the inimitable resources. You simply have to have those inimitable resources be one of your partners producing value in your chain. Very different business model. Another way to see this. All right, the dangerous entrants are those that come into your marketplace with stronger network effects in here. If so, then they can actually then take their developers or attract and get feedback going on their ecosystem as opposed to yours. It's really quite interesting. Another way to put this, it's easier to add a technology to a community than it is to add a community to a technology. Think about it. How easy is it for Android to add an HP calculator to its operating system? It's trivial. They don't even have to do it by trying. A third party does it. By contrast, how easy is it for HP to add a community to the technology, to the calculator? That's hard. That is why you must control the relationship. Okay? Here in the strategy, it's easier to add a technology to a community than it is to add a community to a technology. Old rules of simply controlling the technology will not be enough at all. You need to own the interfaces, you need to own the relationships. Very different business model. So, on the strategy side, under the old model and products, your distinct buyers and suppliers, substitutes, entrants and rivals, your core competencies were your focus. You had supply-side economies of scale. You controlled the individual resources and you worked on cost leadership or product differentiation. You built barriers to entry and boulevards for exit. You want people out of your marketplace. Platforms, completely different way of thinking about things. Here, these customers and producers may overlap. Your competitors can be your complementers if you know how to set the terms of the relationship. You focus on the core interactions, and your scale economies are demand side rather than supply side. I want to emphasize, it's not that supply side economies of scale don't matter. They will always matter. But you must now also start managing the demand side economies of scale, not just the supply side economies of scale. You need both element sides of the equation. And now the community is the asset, and you manage the engagement and the positive spillovers. You need permissionless entry and open architectures and controlling around control points. So that you maintain the elements of the relationship. Again, it's a fundamentally different business model. Now, this is bonus material for this audience. So the next several slides actually provide some additional content on how is B2B different than B2C. I know a large number of you in the audience are from B2B companies. So, other companies, SAP, Kloeckner Metals here in Germany is an excellent example. Salesforce, Mahindra in India, Intel Corporation. How is it different? So, one of the things that's very straightforward is to actually focus on the interactions. All of these platforms focus on the interactions in one way or another. Let me see if I can show you what that then means. So really what you want to focus on is the value of a specific interaction and the total number of interactions. So this is the value of an individual interaction, and this is the volume of a set of interactions. It tends to be the case that B2C has higher volume but lower individual value. To give you a simple illustration, a single Google search has trivial interactions value, but there are trillions of them. So they aggregate very highly. If you take a Kloeckner Steel sales purchase on their marketplace, a single interaction could be millions of dollars. So it has lower volume, but it has higher value for each one. So what you want to look at is focus on the interactions level, and then try to figure out how you can increase the value, how you can increase the volume. Incidentally, this also tells you where you should start. Suppose that you have 5 or 6 different interactions that you could work with. Each of these is, in effect, you want to move up and to the right. So choose the set of interactions that have the highest volume and highest value as you move up and to the right. That should be your starting point. And from there you add complementary or adjacent interactions as a way to actually launch your platform. Other elements of it. The next thing is that B2B often requires an N-way match as opposed to a 2-way. Airbnb or Uber might be matching a single rider to a driver, a single room to a host. An N-way match, you might have to be more like SAP, where you have 2 or 3 different ecosystems providers providing different services to create a whole suite of services together. You have to take the friction out of multiple interactions at the same time. Is that like this line? There we go. You have to get multiple. Another interesting example. Embraer is launching a services marketplace for aircraft. Well, now you might have to match an aircraft to a service team, to a set of tools, all at the same time, to a set of parts. That's a 4-way match. Each of these things, you have to bring all of these things together, and that's a B2B example. Another thing that you absolutely should not overlook, and this is going to be the future, machine-to-machine interaction, M2M. This will massively increase the volume, and it could spread way farther to the right, farther than B2C. If you are looking at the B2B space and you're ignoring M2M, you are missing a huge opportunity. It's the analog in the B2B space of what's happening in the high volume B2C space. So pay attention to that marketplace as well. Last thing I want to point out is it's really important for you to shift competition among your suppliers into cooperation among your suppliers. Look for constellations of ecosystem partners that reinforce one another. A great example actually happens to be Roppongi Hills in Tokyo. This is a shopping mall that has constellations of parties that are hotels, entertainment, retail, and restaurant. It makes no sense to have only restaurants. If you add retail and entertainment, you might go for a movie and then stow shopping, and then after shopping, go for a meal. You try to find constellations of partners whose interactions reinforce one another. So remove the competition. In contrast, Covisint was a B2B supplier where it put the partners in such fierce competition with one another, it left them with no profits, and they left. What happens when one side of a multi-sided market leaves? You can't create the matches, the other side leaves as well. It was a disaster. They lost millions of dollars on doing that. Create cooperation among your ecosystem partners, not competition. Those are other elements of it, again, distinguishing the B2B versus B2C space. Another element. How do you know a market's going to transform? How are you going to be able to predict this? Okay? I've already given you the answer, but now you just need to see it. So what is it about a marketplace? What is it that's different? Platforms are inverted firms. I told you at the very beginning, they move production from inside to outside, right? Because it's now you're having third parties produce on your behalf. Whether it's Intel or Roppongi Hills or Salesforce or others, having third parties do that production. The only way, the really simple mechanism to ask whether a marketplace or whether a market will become a platform is to simply ask how easy is it for third parties to produce? How easy is it for you to invert the firm? We can actually give you several different mechanisms that will actually decide that. So ready for transformation? One, a higher proportion of information value. Why? Because you can then take, other third parties can create that and you can spread it across lots of different communities, thereby creating network effects. Your Google search makes someone else's Google search better. Your piece of software for SAP can be spread across other people, other firms as well. So proportion, remember I showed you earlier, the higher the proportion of value is becoming from intangibles, the more you can focus on data, information, and software, the more you can actually create these kinds of marketplaces. By contrast, if it's big, heavy physical assets, it's harder to then actually do that because you can't spread them across other users. Next one. Is the product or service fine-grained modular so that third parties can produce it, third parties can certify the quality? It's easy for third parties to certify the quality of a Facebook post, a write, or a tweet. It's very hard to do it for highly complex. Boeing can't even produce Boeing aircraft because they're too complex, right? I wouldn't want to crowdsource an aircraft. It's too complex as a way to actually do that, right? Lightly regulated, fault-tolerant industries, it's safe for third parties to experiment. That's where you get the innovation taking place. By contrast, you don't open APIs or nuclear power plants or pacemakers. You'll kill people. Again, this is a way to predict when you should own it and when you should not. Lastly, this balances the top one. If you have physical assets with spare capacity, then you can and you should create marketplaces on top. Why? You are time slicing it and selling it to third parties. Your heavy, expensive assets are great opportunities to create platforms on top. This is your way of actually doing this. All right? So it's a way of thinking about it. Let me give you one last idea. We have about 1 minute left. How do you transform your company? This is just a way to think about the task. All right? Again, this is specific to you. I'll give you another audience on this. Transitioning pipes to platforms. This is a pipeline business. You added value at each stage. It's a really simple schematic of supply, manufacture, assembly, retail, where stuff moves in one direction, value moves in the other direction. There are no network effects in this linear supply chain. But I want you to then abstract from this. This is business to business to business to customer. This as two possible platforms, okay? At either end, you're not getting the interaction taking place at the end here. We're not getting another interaction taking place at this end. But you are in either of these two. This is a possible B2B platform. This one is a possible B2C platform. You can build platforms in either side. The way to make the transition is to open your ends and connect one side to the other so that you manage the interactions in between. Here's how you think about it, okay? If you're the intermediary, the way you think about this is then connecting this group to this group, but you make sure you connect them. After you've connected them, add more of these guys, and add more of these guys. You've now connected more interactions through your systems, and you've added more value. And then what you do, get as many of those interactions taking place as possible. That's where you boosted your engagement. That is where you're getting your network effects. And you can do it in B2C, and you can do it in B2B. Same process, right? I was actually hearing a wonderful story from EcoDynamics earlier on here at Volkswagen. So Philip, this was your story, right? You're actually thinking about connecting printers Visit 3D printers inside Volkswagen in here. It's exactly the same kind of thing where you start with an internal resource and then you open it up to outsiders and create an external value stream. It's a fantastic way of making that transition as you open it up to third parties and they get more engagement on top. That's exactly the kind of thing that can be done. So, to simply summarize, I told you everything changes. It doesn't matter whether it's IT, human resources, finance, marketing, strategy. Every single business function has to move from creating value strictly internally to also creating value externally. So it's R&D, strategy, all of these take on an external counterpart. Okay? Where else are we going to see this? Well, we're going to see it in automotive. We're going to see it in finance and blockchain. City as platform. A lot of my own research is going in this direction. Internet of Things, huge B2B opportunity taking place here. Energies and smart grids, also B2B possibility. Another good market that's going to transform. Underappreciated is construction. That's not just an asset industry, it's also an information industry. Building information modules is exactly where this is going to happen. Education as a platform. We professors are on the chopping block along with everybody else as this actually goes online and create platforms for education. Another one, healthcare. Also, this has both B2B elements and B2C elements. This absolutely will be a platform. It's just been slower to change because of the risks in it and helping move it forward. So to summarize, platforms are fundamentally different than product business models. The driving force is network effects. This leads to gigantic monopolies today, exactly like monopolies of a century ago, but it's for the opposite reason. It is for demand-side economies of scale rather than supply-side economies of scale. This leads to inverted firms, where every single function of the firm needs to take on an external value creating activity, operations management strategy, what have you. Information and community become critical resources. You can predict the transformation by asking how easily you can orchestrate value created by third parties, how easy to do that. And you can cause that transformation by linking elements of your supply chain and being the intermediary. So those are the elements of a way to make that actually happen. So with that, if any of you are interested, these are other different steps in this. I know Ecodynamics is actually doing some wonderful ways of helping you move forward on that. I'm out of time on the talk, but I'm happy to take any other questions to see if there's any other interest or anything else that we'd like to cover. Thank you.
So, thank you very much for this presentation with interesting insights to the platform economy. If we talk about digital transformation in Germany or Europe, we talk often about the 3 Ps: products, processes, and platforms. What we can do, or what I assume to be, what we can do is digitalization in the areas of products and processes, because then it leads directly to automatization. So we digitalize what we always did before. So our industries and our players can do that. How we can train the industry, or how the industry can learn also to build up platforms with digital business models, because it's not lying in the DNA of our players.
So two thoughts on this. The first is that the stepping stone process that you're describing is exactly what you'd want to do. So my own argument is that the most critical technologies for starting this are digitization, data and artificial intelligence. It's going to be things also like cloud, so you can actually move to the cloud and then observe the transactions on behalf of others. So the stepping stone for the digitization of processes is exactly where you should start. The hard part is changing those mental models. And that's where you need actually assistance in actually working with executives to help change the mindset of the executives. One of the biggest problems is actually that exact same problem that faced Steve Jobs and Wolf, the founder of MySpace, the unwillingness to open up. You have to be willing to open your ecosystem, but it's opening under the right terms. Again, this is why so many businesses have failed at exactly that same process previously. Steve Jobs screwed it up in the 80s. Wolf screwed it up in the 2000s. They could have been the gigantic firms earlier. The trick there is to open around critical control points. do not simply go with open source because you lose all the control points. I don't know if you followed the history of Android. When they were initially competing with Apple, they went completely open, and they almost got totally forked. Android open source started to take off. Amazon tried to fork them, and Huawei tried to fork them, and Samsung tried to fork them. They reasserted control through the APIs and through the Google Play Store in order that they could still maintain control. You need to open it up around key control points in order that third parties come in to help you out, but you still can monetize and steer.
But these open up to build up ecosystems and to give away control is, especially in Europe, a very important point you have to crack up, because our strong medium enterprises on the one hand and family companies on the other side think in their competitive advantage they need the control of their technology assets and their product innovativeness and so on, and they are frightened to open up something because it seems to be that to give something away. And do we have to define business in the digital economy a little bit in a different way than before? If we have to open up to invite something else, also competitors to invite to use a platform they have to build up.
So that mindset is exactly what will keep folks from moving forward if you're not careful. So it's the good element of that mindset is adding value, is actually using your resources to create value. I'll draw a metaphor. A really helpful way to do this is think of it as throwing a dinner party. You're not going to have everyone come to your home. You're going to invite key players to come to your home, and actually together you'll have a good experience. So you want to be selective about whom you invite initially. The other way you think about this is when you open, you need, again, I say, people you don't know to bring you ideas you don't have. The way to do that is to create more value than you take. So when you are taxing them, and whatever your method of taxation might be, maybe it's a transaction fee, or maybe it's visibility into their data. Those are two different forms of tax. You simply have to create more value than you take, and then folks will bring you resources. But you still have to do it around control points in order that you can still take your fair share of the value that's created.
Interesting with the fair share, because to bring something in, like data, in such an ecosystem is the one thing. To grab out data about functionalities of products and processes is the other thing. So, especially in the industrial focus, what we can do that the industries not only think about stones and real value, they have to establish by themselves. So to think about in an overall data pool for the invited ones or not invited ones, hopefully more the invited ones, to build up a common value on a platform, also to establish them against the huge competitors from Asia and the United States.
Data ownership is a really interesting challenge. I'm going to make a couple of different claims on this. Again, I notice it's easy to transform markets in which information and data are a huge proportion of that value. I'm going to argue Europe has done one thing well and one thing badly. Well, we'll start with the badly, GDPR. GDPR was very well intentioned. We're giving folks rights back in their data. The hope is, of course, to give folks some negotiating power. We'll actually give you a model and a different metaphor to actually show you why that is and it's something we actually built some formal mathematical models of. Imagine you are a whole ecosystem of developers, and each developer can choose for themselves whether to open their code for other parties to build on it versus keep their code closed so that they can sell it. Well, what normally happens is, I want you to open your code so I can build on it. You want me to open my code so you can build on it. But you don't want to open yours so you can sell. I don't want to open mine so I can sell. So no one opens. What you need is someone to orchestrate that and say, okay, after a spell, you've profited from your code, I've profited from my code. Now, we're going to force an exchange where everyone can gain access to those resources. GDPR has exactly that same effect in individual data. It's increasing the friction. It's creating islands of secrecy and increasing the negotiations costs. The sad consequence of that is that it is also keeping small companies out. The big companies can negotiate for your data because they've already got so much other complementary data to make it really hard for other small startups to come in. What's the solution? Europe had a much better solution in PSD2, Payment Systems Directive 2, where what's that? That's open banking. Now you can gain rights to let Santander Bank go in and manage your funds at Societe Generale, or your funds there can go get managed by Deutsche Bank. What then happens is banks would then compete in order to create and add value to the same data. Open banking is a much better way to do that. And that's the kind of thing that should be happening in Europe in order to grow the ecosystem. So I think your model under open banking is probably the right one in order to grow it over time.
Interesting, because we have later on also a presentation here from a guy from the Sparta Bank. So they also build up a multi-banking platform, so it will be interesting to hear something about that. So come back to this ownership issue, because that's really important from my point of view. And you can separate this from data ownership and platform ownership. Because if you spread data inside an ecosystem, we have a lot of discussion about ownership of customers and so on and so on. On the other hand, also in the B2B sector, what is with the ownership of the platform themselves? And you mentioned the example Sloan by Klöckner. It's interesting because I'm a member of the advisory board at Klöckner, and I follow that, of course, very directly. And the discussion we already have there is how we can signalizing to the market that at the end of the day, after a development, this platform is not in the ownership of Klöckner. So maybe we have also the more partners, also competitors on board, that Klöckner at the end will under 50% to give such a neutral market maker for raw materials in the internet to build up such a platform which have also a relevant issue for the whole branch. Because many players in Europe think if I'm not the owner of something, I will not be a part. So that is definitely a limit to build up digital ecosystems and platforms in Germany. So do you think that maybe the digital ownership on the one hand and the ownership of the platform could be an issue which we have to manage to establish those platforms in general?
How much time do we have?
10 minutes. But you have to go a little bit shorter to it.
You've asked one of the most important questions undergirding all of this. As I said earlier, the data is essential to helping to create some of the network effects. This balancing act between who gets to control the data, this new form of value, is extraordinary. So there are several different ways to think about this. At its heart, the ability to actually take that data and massage it and do something else to gain further insight is exactly what you want. And whether this is in consumer space, where one person's search makes another person's search better, or in a recommender space where your movie watching behavior or consumption patterns can actually be used to improve another, or if it's in healthcare where you're looking for drug interactions, or you're looking across in Siemens MindSphere the maintenance of equipment that can be used and spread across to learn other things about improving the maintenance of other equipment. In all of these cases, the ability to analyze the data and spread it across different interactions is an incredible source of value. Now the question is to understand how it is that ownership creates incentives to participate in and subsequently to create the value. The challenge that you will face is that if each party separately owns their individual data, whether it's individual corporations, or as in Zoom's case, or whether it is individuals, you increase the transactions and negotiations costs for each to gain access to each other's data. The correct solution is for a neutral and honest broker to look out for the interests of these different parties and give them access to each other's. The problem that often arises is the platform is often not a neutral broker and makes a decision in its own interests.
Especially in B2B.
Especially in B2B. So the solution to that is either to separate it off as a separate division or to have a consortium of ecosystem partners that get a vote sufficient to overwhelm the vote of the platform provider itself. But you need a sandbox from in which one can actually analyze the data of another. Let me give you another illustration of exactly the same problem. Most of you may be aware of what's happening in posts. Posts are losing their business. Why? All of the direct mail advertising is going to, guess who? Facebook and to Google. Now what's fascinating about this, and it's exactly relevant to Zoom and others, posts are sealed against inspection. Your data cannot legally be analyzed. Posts can't open your mail, they can't read it. Why are these others so successful? People are voluntarily giving their data, their communications, to Google and Facebook and Amazon, which is not sealed against inspection, and they're creating all this value by analyzing the data.
But that is an example from B2C, and we all know that the customers are not so data protected like in the B2B sector, right?
You know, the funny thing is, when you survey individuals, they say they want data privacy. When you look at their actual choices, they'll give up their data for the discount on bread and milk.
Right, but a B2B player will not give an open access to their price calculation on platforms for a milk bottle.
So here's where I agree with you. Businesses will be more sophisticated than short-term interested consumers. My point was different. My point was, even though consumers don't necessarily like it, they're willing to give that data in exchange for value that has been added. If you create islands of information, they can't add value to each other. You need somebody at the center figuring out ways to add value from one to another. What this argues for is a fair and neutral mechanism for that to happen. Too often the danger is the platform will control it itself. But again, can you set this up as either an independent division, or could you set this up as a consortium of partners that would gain control over that and then grant access? To give you another example from the consumer space, banks are now actually trying to offer negotiation services on behalf of customers because you don't want to get 60 requests a month for access to your data. Most of the time you're just going to say no. What you'd really like is someone that looks out for you on your behalf and tells you this is a good deal or this is a bad deal, and then gives you a share of that value after the fact. That's what you need to do. You need to be able to share the data, and you need a neutral company to be able to create that network effect value on behalf of the others. Again, rule is really simple. Create more value than you take. And if you do that, the ecosystem partners will be happy that they contributed value because they get more value back.
Yeah, the change of digital mindset here is, I think, the most important point to get to this theme. So I want to open up now possible questions from the audience. So if you can raise up your hands, please, then the assistant will come with a microphone, and you have also the possibility to formulate some questions.
So while they're doing that, I will say we will have a 5 to 10 page article on exactly that question next month. So we'll have a question on using data while respecting users.
So maybe we can put the link to this article, also on the platform for the conference.
That should be available in about a month.
What would you, can you hear me? Very good. What would you recommend to the executives or also senior executives regarding to be ready, regarding operational ready to cooperate and for governance and opening the ecosystems?
So you've hit another really important topic, which is how do you govern platforms? Let me back up to answer that directly. I like to define a platform as an open architecture with rules of governance to facilitate interactions. The open architecture is what lets third parties come in and attach and add value. The rules of governance is tell them how to create value and what portion they'll get back out. And then the third part is the interactions, which creates that value. So a lot of what happens is you need the mindset to change so that you invite third parties in. What are the rules of governance? What are they going to get for coming to contribute value in here? So a lot of it, in the book, it's actually chapter 8, how do you do governance, as a way to think about that. But take a look at designing the rules to invite folks in, folks that you don't know, to come in and help you out. And really what you want is to think of spaces of opportunities. What digital real estate do you want to open up, or what new areas of business do you want third parties to help out? And then what are they going to get in exchange for having come in and joined you? What are you going to give them? What tools are you going to give them? What share of the market? What access to customers are you going to give them? What's the quid pro quo? Right? What are they going to give? What are they going to get? Think of it that way. And then people you don't know will come in and help you out.
Thank you. Another question, please.
Thanks for. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks for the talk and the information. It was kind of pure cocaine. Excellent. One issue is there coming up now that one could optimize a platform strategy from an economic point of view. And now we see that those platforms who really make it for economic success might create social collateral damage, which might even be much higher than the economic kind of value they create. I'm quite fascinated by this debate, not coming up only in Europe, but our European competition commissioner now being really supported also by Americans, and now the $5 billion fines and penalties being also exerted from Washington to Silicon Valley. So how do you think we have to deal with that issue?
So now you're asking a couple of the policy questions. Let me interpret that at least in two different examples. One of them in some ways is the antitrust question. Are you hurting small enterprises in competition with the large platforms? Another one of these is also, for example, the fake news question. We might get, as a consequence, Brexit or orangutans in the White House. We have a number of interesting problems that result from that. There is a lot that can be done in that space. Matter of fact, some other things that we're working on are solutions to the fake news problem, and also what are the proper regulatory interventions for platform antitrust. In general, it's helpful to think of this, again, as a governance question, and then ask, how is governance used to correct market failures? What are the sources of market failures? Market failures happen from information asymmetries, they happen from market power, they happen from public goods problems, they happen from externalities. What's fascinating about it is that almost always market failures on platform get corrected by the platform. To give you an example, if someone cheats you on a ride on Uber, Uber will fix it. If you're cheated on a product example on on Alibaba or eBay, they will step in and fix it. But if it's an externality that happens off-platform, they don't fix it. As an example, fake news generates engagement, but it also affects votes off-platform. So platforms like Zuckerberg love fake news because it gets engagement. Matter of fact, it gives you broader stimuli in order to figure out what the data are that press your buttons and sell you more whatever. We need to design rules to cause and force platforms to internalize their negative externalities. They will fix the market failures on platform. They do not fix the market failures that occur off-platform. A few ways to do that are, in some ways, voiding intellectual property rights, some taxation questions, getting them to internalize their damage in the same way that we would internalize the damage from effluent in your water and your air. They don't internalize the damage at the moment, and we need to actually get them to do that. There's a whole different set of issues that we can use to address competitive antitrust. That's a different question. Happy to go into that as well, but that's a way to approach the problem in the right way.
Last question, and please a short answer. Do the players in Europe have a chance in the platform game?
They do.
In which area?
It's interesting one of the conversations we've had so far is actually, I think, in the B2B space, especially in Germany. You're very good at industrial production. So I think a lot of your opportunities are in the B2B space, in the IoT space, and also, quite frankly, because you're doing open banking legislation ahead of the Americans, you've also got interesting opportunities in the fintech space.
But hopefully we learned that it's not enough to build up technology platforms as well as market platforms which are linked to each other. So thank you very much for this Meine Damen und Herren, wir haben gerade schon die verschiedenen Branchen angesprochen und jetzt gehen wir genau